Well, welcome everybody to our podcast, Kohima Educational Trust podcast tonight. It's going to be really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Easterine talk about the Naga experience of the war and her experience and her family's experience as well, and the challenge that historians have of trying to interpret memories. We are looking at well over 100 participants tonight, so you're very welcome as you all join. And again, we've got people from all around the world. And I think one of the things about this podcast is we get lots of people from around the world during the podcast, and then we see that it's been listened to by hundreds of people in the weeks following, which is really exciting. And thank you very much for participating in these and for spreading the word and for enjoying them. As ever, as we go through tonight, if you've got any questions, stick them in the Q&A, and if we've got time at the end, either I or Easterine will be able to answer them. If we can't answer them, then of course we'll stick them on the website for subsequent response. Well, that's enough for me. Welcome everyone. I'll hand over now to Sylvia May.
Well, hello everyone, and another very warm welcome to our Kohima Educational Trust webinar. And tonight it is our pleasure to introduce to you Dr Easterine Kire, a well-known Naga author and publisher, who tonight is going to be talking about her own mother and Aunt Mari, the latter whose biography Easterine wrote some years back, which I'm pleased to say has just been reissued. Easterine has also written many critically acclaimed novels, among them the first Naga novel to be published in English called A Naga Village Remembered, and more recently a winner of our own Gordon Graham Prize for Naga Literature, When the River Sleeps, which also won the Hindu Prize for the best fiction in 2015. Easterine has also had much of her poetry published, and some of you may recall it was her poem called In Grateful Dedication that was recited by the actress Shobna Gulati at the 75th commemoration service at Horse Guards Parade. And we were delighted when Easterine agreed to recite it for us at our own Christmas Service of Remembrance webinar in 2022. Joining us this evening, as always, as you've already heard, Rob Lyman is here, and you all know he's the author of many brilliant books, and most recently the book co-authored with Richard Dannett, From Victory to Defeat. And as always, do use the Q&A button or the chat line if you would like to. And I know that both Rob and Easterine will be happy to answer any questions at the end. We hope we'll make time for it. But without further ado, you don't want to hear more from me now. I will hand you over to Rob to get the evening started. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much indeed, Sylvia. It is, as I said earlier, an enormous privilege to be able to welcome Easterine to our podcast. I first came across Easterine through her auntie, Lily. We might hear a little bit about her tonight, who is Mari or Avi's, who was Mari or Avi's mother. And I was completely reliant on the work that Easterine undertook in the first place to interview Avi. I did that subsequently, but Easterine led the way. And I also have been completely reliant over the years on the amazing work that Easterine has done to interview and publish the memoirs of Nagas in the Battle of Kohima. So where I followed, Easterine has gone before. And it's lovely to be able to acknowledge my debt to Easterine tonight. I'm just going to say a couple of words before I hand over to Easterine, just to remind everyone of where we are. I think everyone on this podcast will know that we're talking about Kohima, the primary town, Angami town in what is now Nagaland, what was then the Naga Hills. And hopefully you can see the map there from one of my books, Kohima at the top, showing that it's the location of the operation undertaken by General Sato and his 31st Division to secure the route from Dimapur into Imphal. And this is the area that we're principally going to be talking about tonight in terms of the Naga experience of the battle in 1944, in which the Japanese attempted to invade India. Well, that's enough from me. I'm really, really delighted tonight to be able to introduce Easterine to you. And I'll now pass over to Easterine for her to take us through the story of her family's experience. Easterine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katie, for having me this evening. I'll go straight to the talk. I will begin with my mother because she was the central source of all oral history for me, especially on the war. My mother, Annie, was born in December 1932. So she was 11 years when the Japanese occupation of her hometown, Kohima, happened. Mom was the youngest in the family, and she had two sisters, Jabu, who was 15 in 1944, and Marie, who was 17. And Marie was also engaged to her soldier fiancé, and they were waiting for the war to be over so they could have a church wedding. The three girls had a brother, Samuel, who was 23 and already married. He was also working as a King Scout, and he worked closely with the Deputy Commissioner. On the 3rd of April, the three sisters were evacuated to a village called Chisema, which was 16 kilometers from Kohima. They were on the run for about 2 months, and a lot happened during those 2 months. By early June 1944, they were able to return home. And when they came back, there were no more enemy soldiers. The war was over, schools reopened, and people began to rebuild their shattered houses and lives. Can we go to the next clip, please? So this was a time when the government was saying the war is over, but our people said, no, it is not, because the war stayed with us in many different forms. In war debris, for instance. In the mid-60s, my brother David found what he describes as a steel case of bullets, and this was on my grandfather's land. There were about 100 bullets, and David and some of the big boys removed the gunpowder, and he said it looked like vermicelli. I must tell you a little about my grandfather's house and my grandmother. My grandfather's house was halfway between Mission Compound and Kohima village, which is Naga village in the war maps. So soldiers would come up the hill, rest outside my grandfather's house, and climb up the rest of the hill to engage with the Japanese. My grandmother never left Kohima village. She refused to leave the house, so she was there throughout the war. And whenever soldiers came up and rested outside her house, she would give them water. So one of these days, a group of soldiers came up, and she noticed that one of the soldiers was very young. She said he must have been about 16. He was so young. As usual, they drank water and they climbed up the hill. But in the evening, when they came back, the young soldier was not with them. So my grandmother asked the men, "Where's Johnny?" Johnny was the name that the local people gave to all the soldiers, and the soldiers would respond whenever they called him Johnny. So she asked, "Where's Johnny?" And the leader said, "Johnny's not coming back again, Ma." My grandmother would always have tears in her eyes when she told us this story. So I'm retelling this story because in a way it's a kind of painful war debris. Let me tell you about something that happened in 1956. A cousin of my father had a friend who had found an undetonated mortar shell. the two of them planned to remove the gunpowder and reuse it. So on a Saturday, because Saturday was a holiday, they went to the field where the shell was, and they went to carry out their plan. Back in the village, they heard a loud explosion, and people came running, trying to find out what had happened and also to try and help. But it was too late for the two men. 21 years after that, on the 18th of February in 1977, the pastor of Kohima village was sitting in the church alone. His eyes were closed in prayer, but he heard the sound of children running up and down the wooden floors of the church. And he was surprised because, as he said, it was really very early, 4:30 to 5 in the morning. So it wasn't time for children to be up and about. He opened his eyes, but there was no one there. Later that afternoon, 8 young boys were playing with a mortar shell that they had found. According to one account, they were throwing stones, and whenever they saw sparks, they would see sparks when the stones landed accurately. The explosion was very, very loud when it happened, and it echoed around the village. And the boys' play ended in a way that no parent wants to go through. Can we go to the next clip, please? Thank you. The war also stayed with us in spirit sightings. I want to begin with telling you the story of my aunt, Ajujabu. In the picture, this is a family picture. She is the second on the left. That's my left. Yes, thank you. Yes, that's Ajujabu. So this story happened in the mid-50s. Ajujabu had gone to spend the night in her brother's house, her brother Samuel, who by then was working as the supervisor of the Commonwealth War Graves in Northeast India. And he lived in a house that had been built a few meters below the famous tennis court of the DC. She had her young son with her. He must have been about 3 or 3.5. And they were spending the night. So after dinner, they went to their bedroom. But her son kept fussing and was cranky and would not go to sleep. So when his mother asked, "What's wrong with you?" he pointed to a corner of the room and he said, "Tell that soldier to go away. He's been standing there and looking at us all the time." When Ajujabu looked at the corner of the room, she saw nothing. I'd like to also tell you about my sister Grace and her experience. In the mid-70s, in 1975, Grace was married, and she and her husband went to live in a house on Garrison Hill. It was a government house, so there were guards 24/7, and the guards would report very strange sights and strange experiences, especially in the middle of the night. And Grace herself would hear groups of men whistling. I've called them the whistlers. And this always happened in the night, late at night. And they would whistle the tune, the theme song from Bridge Over the River Kwai. Their gardener also had a surprise visitor. Garrison Ground was very close to the woods, so deer would come into the garden and eat up the vegetables. So the gardener had a dog, and one night his dog started barking frantically. So he thought he would go out and chase deer, took his flashlight and ran out to investigate. And he found his dog barking at a very tall and very big soldier from the Second World War. Can we have the next clip? I'll take you back to war debris because not all war debris cause damage. There was a pastor from Sohomi village who said that he found a mortar shell in the river Tizu. He cleaned the gunpowder from it and brought it back to the village. And to this day, they still use it as a church bell. The shell is very big. It's as big as a water pitcher. Then the next account is spoons in Kohima. Some housewives of Kohima are proud owners of spoons made from metal that was retrieved from the wing of a crashed airplane. And the women say that the metal is so much better than what they get in the market. There was a woman of Kohima who had a very unusual water container in her kitchen. And on inquiry, she explained that somebody had brought her the nose of a plane, and she found a very creative use for it. Then cake ovens. After the war, again, this is a story that my mother told me. After the war, the bigger girls didn't want to go to school anymore. These were girls around 15, 16, 17. And the American missionary lady decided to teach them some practical skills. She thought of teaching them how to bake cake. But the shops in Kohima did not sell ovens. However, there were lots of abandoned munitions boxes lying around. So the girls were sent to collect the munitions boxes, and they made very good ovens. Another use of war debris was as flower pots. Many of the Angami villages, in many of the villages, the women collected discarded helmets, made holes in them, filled them with soil, and grew flowers. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. In 2004, we started to collect memories and stories from soldiers as well as civilians who had witnessed the war. And it was a very, very interesting experience. We made a little book out of all these accounts. And you can also read some of these accounts in Rob's book, Robert Lyman's books on the Battle of Kohima, and also in Charles Jash's book, The Road to Kohima. Our booklet is sold out, so we're making a second edition. I want to digress a little and tell you about the prophetess of Kigwema. Now, whenever Nagas go into a war or a battle, it's always done with a lot of ceremony. And warriors prepare for battle by performing different rituals such as ritual of purification, sanctification, etc. And married men live apart from their wives at that time. And the warriors are also warned to listen to their dreams and to take note of omens. But there was nothing of this sort when the Japanese invasion happened. Nevertheless, something happened in the village of Kigwema to bring back the ceremonies, and that was the visit of the prophetess. So I have an account where the narrator described her like this. She was dressed fully in white, and she carried a spear and a Nepali kukri. She pranced around for some time, and then she prophesied in a shrill voice, "War is coming to our land very soon." And a few months after this prophecy, things change rapidly. The Japanese invasion happened in a very dramatic way, and I'd like to read from the account again, because the southern villages were all occupied at the same time. On the morning of the 3rd April 1944, we heard some of our villagers shouting, "The whole forest is moving. So many of them have come." We ran to watch this phenomenon, and indeed, it was exactly as they said. The whole forest came alive, and there was not one spot that was still. Men poured out of the forest near the village, from behind every rock and every green plant. They were Japanese soldiers with guns out thrust. They were a terrifying sight, and our hearts froze within us. They surged forward, and even as we stood there transfixed, they reached the village in a few minutes. The same sources from Kigwema told us that General Sato and Subhash Chandra Bose had camped at Kigwema. Can we go to the next clip? When we were collecting the stories of survivors, one of the best stories was finding the rescuers of Flight Officer Ray Jackson. It was Rob May, the husband of Sylvia, who had given us the story of Flight Officer Ray Jackson, who took off from Palel in Manipur, but his port wing was hit and he had to bail out, and he landed behind enemy lines. And so he was wandering around in the forest, or hiding more likely in the forest, for about 12 days. And on the 12th day, he was rescued by 2 men. 2 of our boys wanted to find the rescuers, but they really had nothing to go on except this story. So they reached Peg, and the people of Peg were so nice, so helpful and hospitable, and they managed to help them find the 2 men who had rescued Ray Jackson. One was Susai, who was 85 years already, and the other was Vepopa, who was 95. We can go to the next clip. This is an interesting memorial. It's the memorial stone of the Japanese Education Center at Jakama, because the Japanese established schools, and the children of the village were taught to count in Japanese and sing songs in Japanese. I have an interesting story from here, which I've called The Prisoner of Jakama. I'll read to you from the account. One day there was a great commotion in the village. I heard people shouting, "There's a prisoner, a white soldier." I ran out to look. A tall young British soldier, heavily guarded by Japanese soldiers, was being led around the village. The villagers followed from a distance till they led him to the duck bungalow, where the village boys saw him fall asleep. The prisoner did not seem perturbed on the occasions that the village people saw him, but the elders were acutely aware of the danger he was in. Day after day, night after night, they tried to rescue the young soldier. There were periods when he was left alone at Nizol's house, but at these times, they always found him fast asleep. No one could succeed in waking him up. The elders said, but we must try again." I heard my uncle tell his father, "But what is to be done? We must rouse him from sleep, yes, but he will not be roused. He cannot be roused. We have tried countless times. It is as though he were drugged, or it could be that this is his destiny." Soon word came from Posy saying, "One of my soldiers has gone missing. If anyone has any information on him, he will be rewarded." The elders hurriedly called a meeting, Their decision was unanimous. No one must know that the missing man is here in our midst. We will be punished for not helping him. And God knows we have tried so hard to help him, but he will not be helped. The village people continued to try and bring about his release, but it was impossible. Finally, one morning, the village crier shouted out the news: "The Japanese are preparing to behead the prisoner today. Everyone is ordered to come and see." The message was carried out all over the village. We can go to the next clip. This is the cover of my book Marie. It's about my aunt Marie. I've used war romance to write insider history, and in the writing of this book, I've had to recreate pre-war Kohima, and I did that by using my mom's and Marie's memories. So they answered questions on how many shops there were, what the shops sold, and schools. There were 2 schools back then, and the number of cars, and there were two cars, the people, flowers, etc. And Marie had a diary that she had kept during the war. So I used that largely, and the book is written like a diary. Instead of chapters, it has diary entries. We can go to the next clip. This is a picture of my mom in the 60s, and they were on the run for 2 months, and there was a great many changes. I want to read from the book. School was closed. The school remained closed, but students found other things to do. Some of the older boys from our school left for Tidim to work as laborers. Jimmy went with them. Jimmy was the neighbor boy who was with them throughout the war. After 2 months, he came home for good. Everyone gathered around him in the evening and listened to stories about the preparations for war in Tidim. Jimmy and his friends had worked on road digging in the area. They were paid well. Jimmy said some of the local people at Tidim could speak English. He had also learned a few Burmese words. He said that there were many more warplanes flying back and forth. It was one of the reminders that a war was close at hand. We saw other signs around us. Kohima had become very different from the peaceful little hamlet we had grown up in. There was movement all around. Every day you could see more and more British, Indian, and Gurkha troops coming to Kohima and camping all over the place. There were soldiers everywhere. The preparations for war that had been suspended for the Christmas celebrations seemed to have resumed with renewed energy. So my mother and her sisters were evacuated to a village 16 kilometers away, and on the second day they saw Kohima burn. I'll read again. When we reached the wooden gate of the village, we heard the loud roar of guns and the sound of grenades and bombs exploding. We looked towards Kohima anxiously. The village faced Kohima directly, and from where we stood, we could see the town and the houses on top of the hills. How shocked we were to see the whole of Kohima ablaze and covered with thick black smoke. We could not believe our eyes. The peaceful and charming little town that had been our home all those years was going up in smoke. We stood there holding hands, and Annie began to sob. On top of that, they were threatened by a tiger on one of the nights because they had to leave the village, the first village they had gone to, which was overrun by Japanese soldiers, and my mother and her sisters were going from shelter to shelter in the woods. So in one of the shelters, which is not much more than a shed, there was a tiger in the vicinity. As we were preparing to go to sleep, we heard the sound of a tiger growling outside. It was a terrifying sound, a low, angry rumbling. The men brought more firewood and fed the fire in an effort to keep it away. It was a moonless night. We couldn't see the animal, but we could all hear it growling at intervals. Then I will also read to you the story of the bee, the mystery of the bee. This is in another shelter. While we were collecting our things, a lone bee suddenly came buzzing and humming and headed directly for me. It tried to settle first in my hair, then on my shoulder, and hovered over me. I tried to swat it away, but it came right in front of my face and kept buzzing there. We tried to chase it away, but it kept returning to me. "What's wrong with that bee?" cried Marina. The bee went away for a while and came back to me. It buzzed around me for so long that everyone was alarmed. Our people were always aware of unusual signs in the natural world. I suddenly felt alarmed and frightened. Was this bee trying to tell me something, bringing me a message perhaps? Our people say that if a bee does not stop bothering a person for a long time, it's because it has a message for the person. My heart went out to Mother and Vic. Vic was their fiancé. Had something happened to them? Was the bee trying to tell me that Mother had been killed? And Vic, where was he now? Still at Garrison Hill, or had he moved away to Dimopur? Tears streamed down my face. And the mystery of the bee is solved a few pages later. Jimmy had gone to Dimopur, and I'll read from when he comes back in the evening. It was late in the evening when Jimmy returned to the village. As soon as we saw him, we waved and called to him, but he looked tired and sad. Strangely, he did not respond to our smiles and waving, which was quite uncharacteristic of him. In all the years that I had known him, Jimmy had always been cheerful, and in the ordeal we shared in the jungle, it was he who had kept our spirits up. At first, I thought he was playing a trick on us, but he drew near and said heavily, "I have sad news. I'll tell you all after supper." He was genuinely disturbed and looked very helpless. The war had made him a man prematurely, but now, burdened with his news, he looked very young again. It reminded me that he was only 15. We refused to wait till supper to hear his news. Badgered by all four of us, he broke down and said he had met Mr. Z. Angami, one of the district commissioner's officers. With tears in his eyes, Jimmy looked at me and said, "Vic was killed on the 18th of April by a sniper's bullet." My world collapsed at his words. Vic dead, Vic killed by a sniper's bullet. The news sank in slowly. Vic killed on the 18th of April. That was the same day that the bee had hovered around me for hours. So this is Marie as a young girl on the left, and Marie in around 2007 or 2008 in a photograph taken by Rob Lyman. I am going to finish my talk by reading from the last page of her book. Kohima sleeps, a Kohima so different from the Kohima of my youth. It is rare to see it thus, tranquil in the grip of sleep. I don't want to go to sleep now. I want to watch this stillness a little longer. It feels as though the past and the present are intermingling at this very minute, but only for a moment. And when I have closed the window, the past will have flown and the present will rush in and take over. There, I have done it. Closed the windows, slid my diary into the bottom drawer of my dressing table. But I can't seem to close the drawer shut. The edge of the diary sticks out and my eyes rest on it. I suppose it will always be like that. I suppose the past will always remain with me. And with Marie, I can say that the war will always remain with us in its many forms. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Easterine. That's incredibly moving. Just to say that this particular slide here is actually of Kohima Ridge immediately after the battle, with Garrison Hill on the left. But I'll now hand back to Sylvia May.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Easterine, for a wonderful insight into Naga life, beautifully told. And it took me back the two or several stories you told about war debris. When my husband Rob and I first went to Kohima in 2000, unbelievably 24 years ago, we remember that there was much, as you call it, war debris being reused, repurposed, cherished in many cases, and used as flower pots and water containers, just as you told us all those decades before. But it was still happening, wasn't it? Well, are there any questions? I think Rob will have a look while I'm doing our usual plug, because we will have copies of Mari available for sale on our shop very soon. As I mentioned, it is being reissued, so we don't have any at the moment, but we will get copies if anyone would like to read it. Very happy to hold on to your orders while we wait. And as I mentioned last time, we now have the 80th anniversary poppy pin back in stock, and also the Battle of Imphal pin for those of you that would like one of those, made for us by the Royal British Legion. They're a marvelous memento of this anniversary year. And I reckon there's still just time to get that last minute Father's Day gift, and our shop sells a large range of books, as you know, and Naga crafts, including ties, which I figured might be nice. Otherwise, lots of other gifts available, all the clothes and jewellery made in Naga homes, as you know. And then tickets are still available, and for our dinner in York, when Lord Dunnett is going to be our guest speaker. It's on the 3rd of July at Merchant Adventurers Hall. And we've got a star-studded lineup of guests with a military band in a beautiful setting, and it will be a wonderful way to commemorate the 80th anniversary in a way that we don't normally do. And similarly, if you have yet to book for the service and lunch the following day on Thursday, the 4th of July, please do this as soon as possible. The bookings are still open, but I'm wanting to close it next week, by the middle of next week, but there's still plenty of time. You've got a week still if you'd like a ticket. Our webinar program is now going to take a bit of a summer break. We will be back on September the 19th, when Katrina Child will be our guest speaker, and she will be talking about her mother, Ursula Graham Bauer. In the meantime, thanks everyone for listening. Rob, are there any questions you want to take now, or we can pick them up later?
There are a couple of very good questions. There's a very good one by Magnus Torren. I'll just read it out. Easterine, can you talk a little bit about your sources, letters, diaries, oral testimonies, audio recordings? And are there any thoughts about hopes for the future regarding more research around Kohima?
Okay. Shall I talk then?
Yes, yes.
It's a little late now for us back at home, because in terms of getting oral testimonies, that is, and audio recordings, because many of the survivors are no longer with us. Many of the witnesses are no longer with us. But their children are around, and there are people who know the stories from their parents. So it's possible to get this. My sources, I was very fortunate to have my mother around and my aunt, and also diaries, the diary of my aunt, and letters of my grandfather, a few. So I use these. Any thoughts about hopes for the future? No, not really, but as I said, there are many spirit sighting stories, and people are very eager to give them to me. So Yeah, that's my answer.
That's a great answer, Easterine. We've really enjoyed tonight. Thank you. I think one of the really exciting things for us and the Kohima Educational Trust is how many people are now engaging with us from a historical perspective. And we're finding out more and more from families. They're coming forward with material. I'm hoping to write another book on Kohima next year, and it will use a lot of the material that you started with, Easterine, way back in 2004, and which you've developed over the years. And clearly going to use Avie's story again, Marie's story. Just so that people know, Marie comes from Marigold, because Marigold was the name that Vic gave to his young girlfriend, Avie, which I think is absolutely lovely. And I'll just end on this. Please, if you haven't read Marie, when the book comes back into the KET shop, please get it. It's absolutely fabulous. It's a fabulous story. It's also incredibly well written, and you'll be blown away by it, as I was when I first read it all those years ago. Well, I'll say goodbye now, I think, Sylvia, and thank you very much, Easterine, for joining us tonight. It's been fabulous. It's great to be able to go back to those years and hear the stories of the war from family and friends who were there, and we look forward to seeing you in York if you can come, if not at the next webinar in a short while. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Easterine, and thanks, Rob, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you in September, if not at York. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.